From humble beginnings of brutal backyard brawls to the blinding spotlight of UFC stardom, this is Jorge Masvidal revealing the biggest regrets of his career. When it comes to big names in the UFC, Jorge Masvidal most definitely gets an honorable mention. The Cuban-born fighter has experienced one of the most meteoric rises in the sport of MMA, turning around a savage losing streak to become one of the highest-paid athletes on their promotion roster. Masvidal has blessed fight fans all over the globe with some undeniably awesome performances, using his elite-level striking to add KO after KO to his highlight reel. After a brutal war against Gilbert Burns at UFC 287 in Miami, Florida, the MMA veteran announced his retirement from the sport he loves. And since then, he's had some time to reflect on his career. The Florida native has spoken out about his past, and even revealed some of his most personal regrets with regards to his time in the octagon. But let's take a look at Jorge's journey and the rocky road that led him to becoming one of the UFC's fan favorites. Masvidal was born on November 12, 1984, to a Cuban father and Peruvian mother. The fighter claims that his father left Cuba on a self-made raft and ended up in the Virgin Islands. If there's one thing for sure, Jorge didn't grow up with a silver spoon in his mouth. At St. Brendan High School, he competed on the wrestling team but eventually was dropped due to his low grades. Young Jorge turned to karate and mixed martial arts, and he became notorious in his neighborhood for street fighting. He began participating in backyard fights against Miami-Dade County, placing bets with his friends as a way to make some extra cash. Speaking on that period of his life, he said, "We were placing wagers and bets. You know, my buddy would put $500 to see if the other side want to put up $500. Considering his rough background, it's not surprising that Jorge built a reputation for being willing to fight anyone, anywhere, anytime. Eventually, a buzz began surrounding the young fighter's name, and he was invited to fight in the backyard of the later famous Kimbo Slice. Slice, who would go on to compete at heavyweight in the UFC, had earned a name for himself by hosting brawls in his backyard, filming them and posting them to YouTube, gaining thousands of views. It was a huge opportunity for Masvidal, and he knew it. Reflecting on the memory, he said, "This is the same guy that's getting all these crazy views. He's knocking people out dead, and he's given me a chance?" It was exactly what Jorge was looking for, and he jumped at the opportunity to gain more fame. One of his most notable performances on the YouTube series was against Kimbo's very own protege, Ray, who'd become notorious for putting his opponents to sleep with a vicious right hand. Masvidal was obviously the much smaller fighter, but the weight advantage didn't make a difference, as he managed to beat Ray with a flurry of brutal punches. It led to the beginning of an extremely successful fighting career for Jorge. But the UFC star experienced plenty of hardships along the way. Early photos of the fighter can be found where he holds up a sign that reads, "Hungry, will fight for food." Little did he know that later he'd be fighting to the tune of millions of dollars. Masvidal garnered some success in lower-class MMA promotions before managing to gain a spot in Bellator and later Strikeforce. In 2013, he finally made his way to the UFC. But unfortunately, it wasn't all just smooth sailing from there. The young fighter picked up some steam with a couple impressive wins against the likes of Tim Means and Michael Chiesa. In 2014, he picked up a trio of decision wins, but following those fights, things started to get a little rough for the Florida fighter. He seesawed between losses and KO victories, and ended up holding the UFC record for the most split decision losses. His future in the sport seemed unclear, and we couldn't blame you if you thought it was over for Masvidal. After a 16-month layoff, during which he made an appearance on a Spanish reality TV show, Jorge made a shocking comeback, knocking out Darren Till in brutal fashion at UFC Fight Night in 2019. The victory restored his reputation and was only the beginning of his rising star. Following the victory, Masvidal told ESPN, "I reverse-engineered my whole career numerous times, but never in depth like I did this last time." He followed up with the record-breaking knockout of Ben Askren just 5 seconds into their bout, and later that year he defeated UFC veteran and MMA royalty Nate Diaz via devastating KO. In the space of a year, Masvidal had gone from journeyman to MMA superstar, and he went on to re-sign a lucrative deal with the UFC, making him one of their top 5 highest-paid fighters. Not bad for a kid who started off fighting in backyard brawls for a couple $100. Now that he's retired, the fighter is taking time to reflect on his career, and he's had his fair share of controversies to look back on and regret. Throughout his career, Masvidal's rough background has been evident, as he's never shied away from getting into altercations with his fellow fighters. During an interview following his bout with Darren Till, Masvidal was heckled by British welterweight Leon "Rocky" Edwards. Rather than ignore him, Jorge opted to approach his competitor and attack him. The two exchanged blows before being separated by security, and Masvidal later famously said that he'd served Leon the 3-piece and a soda. Edwards opted not to press charges, but Jorge wouldn't be so lucky the next time he clashed with a fighter. While they started off as training partners and friends, Colby Covington and Masvidal have seen their relationship devolve publicly into an ugly feud. The two have faced each other in the ring, which saw Covington walk away with a victory via unanimous decision. It seems like Masvidal wasn't satisfied with that result, and less than 3 weeks after their fight, when the two ran into each other outside of a restaurant in Miami, the Florida native sucker punched his former friend multiple times, which has led to ongoing court proceedings between the two. Just a day before his retirement fight against Gilbert Burns, Masvidal was seen clashing with middleweight contender Kevin Holland. And the pair insulted each other the following day at the pre-fight press conference. I guess when your come-up involves beating people to a pulp in someone's yard, you're never afraid to let those hands fly. Interestingly, the laundry list of controversies that Masvidal has been involved in don't seem to weigh too heavily on his mind. When the fighter looks back on his career, he claims to be more concerned with his performance inside the octagon, rather than his numerous altercations outside of it. Speaking to Ariel Helwani on the MMA Hour, Masvidal mentioned having a million regrets, which mainly seemed to involve not taking accountability, referring to himself as Captain Hindsight. The 37-year-old fighter explained how he ignored his coach's advice at crucial moments, and wishes that he was wiser when he was competing just a few years before retiring. He went on to give himself some credit in having perhaps opened the doorway for other fighters from a similar background who may not have a perfect record, but are still capable of achieving great success in the sport. In all fairness, he's most definitely right. Masvidal's whole career is a testament to the fact that fighters don't have to be perfect in order to win themselves fans all over the globe and cash some of the biggest checks the sport has to offer. The former UFC star may well return to the sport. Just weeks after retiring, he told ESPN, "It's so much love and passion in my heart, so I'll never say that I'll never come back." Who knows? We may get to see the former BMF title holder back on the world stage, fighting for UFC gold. So, from humble beginnings of brutal backyard brawls to the blinding spotlight of UFC stardom, this was Jorge Masvidal revealing the biggest regrets of his career.